Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Optimistic Future podcast. My name is Bryan Rade, and I am your host. And today I am going to talk about currency debasement, which sounds like kind of a heavy topic because it kind of is a heavy topic. But I think it's a really important topic to discuss because it really relates to how optimistic our individual futures might be. Um, Now, just for a little bit of backdrop here, for folks who have been listening to the podcast for a little while now, maybe you're just tuning in after maybe having missed a few episodes. I've been kind of jumping around a little bit. The first several episodes of the Optimistic Future podcast focused on more lighter topics, if you will, simple things that we could do day to day to help make the world a better place, things that have a positive impact on local economies and social impacts, like positive social impacts and positive environmental impacts, things like that. And you can cross-reference previous episodes, or if you want the sort of TLDR, too long didn't read, the optimisticfuturepodcast.com website, just optimisticfuturepodcast.com. Then there's a little summary of like all those notes there. So please feel free to cross-reference that if you're interested, and the link to that's in the show notes below. The last couple of episodes I've posted, I've done a couple of solo episodes talking about just kind of bigger ideas about sort of like where our society, where our world is heading. How the our future is going to be very likely heavily impacted by AI and kind of a changing sort of job market, changing landscape, and related to a lot of those things. And so I am going to do some more episodes around that. I'll go back to some other of the lighter, just day-to-day things we can do episodes, be kind of jumping around a bit. But this is an episode that I've been talking about currency debasement, and what we can do to shield ourselves against that or try to bulletproof ourselves against that, is just a topic that I've been wanting to do an episode about for a while because it's something that I think a fair bit about in my day-to-day life. And I just think it's a really important topic to be aware of. And to be perfectly frank, I really didn't have this. I had this a little bit on my radar for several years. Didn't really look into it a whole heck of a lot. Didn't really want to look into it because it's kind of like a bit of a heavy, quasi-depressing topic. But then sort of really went down the rabbit hole several months ago, anyways, maybe a year ago. I don't remember exactly when, and really looked into it and thought, like, you know what? I've got to kind of take the bull by the horns here, and better to, it's better to know what we're dealing with and try to take it head on as opposed to like, go full ostrich and just stick one's head in the sand. Now, no judgment. If you're like, you know what, this is just not the episode for me. I don't want to hear about currency debasement. No judgment. It's all good. But I just figure that if I had listened to a podcast episode several years ago about this, I wish I had known back then what I know now, because I could have prepared myself even more for what seems to be coming down the hatch, or down the pipe, I should say. So with all of that out of the way, so kind of the quick little overview is that I'd like to just quickly talk about what's the story with currency debasement, and then what are some of the things that we can do to kind of prepare for that or shield ourselves for that, or just kind of be best prepared for the future. Because at the end of the day, I feel that there is an optimistic future for us. Is a bright, shining path that we can have. Very the world around us can be better for us and other people in the world as well. That's the whole purpose of this podcast. However, having good financial security, especially in what likely will be some tumultuous times coming forward as sort of our world figures out how to deal with AI and some of the changes that are coming down the pipe. I think that having that good financial security is it's a feather in one's cap. Better to have good financial security than not have good financial security. So, with all that preamble out of the way, what is currency debasement? Now, sorry, before one more little preamble before I get into that. This is not financial advice. I am certainly not a financial advisor. I am a naturopathic doctor by profession. So those are things I know lots and lots about that. But I I'm a deep thinker, and I am a fairly clever individual, if I do say so myself. And so this is kind of a topic that I think is very important to know about. And so as much as I'm not giving financial advice, I'm just sharing what I've learned about this topic myself, what my understanding is of it. And then I am going to talk about some resources where you can listen to people who are experts in this area if you want to learn more yourself. So it's the whole, do your own research, DYOR, and Yeah. So just getting that little caveat out of the way. So my understanding of currency debasement is that essentially, there's a lot of debt in the world. Now, I'm located in Canada. I'm most familiar with what's happening in Canada, the United States, because of course they're our closest neighbor, and they're always just plastered in the news everywhere. So they're obviously very everybody knows about what's going on in the States, if not in other places. And then fairly aware of what's happening in Europe, and then some sense of other countries. So this is very much like kind of Western culture based, but that's just what I know. So my understanding of it is that there's a lot of debt in the world. My understanding is that countries have a collective approximately $300 trillion in debt, which is just ridiculous. That's so many zeros, it's unfathomable. My understanding is that the U.S., I believe they're around 37 trillion in debt. I don't know where we're at in Canada. I think we're around a trillion in debt or something like that. But it's a lot. Proportionately, it's a lot. And so the challenge is that when countries are in debt, they have to pay interest on that debt. And when the debt becomes so high that the amount of interest they're paying is just like a ridiculously high. Like, we all know that you don't want to get into credit card debts. Like, oh, 20% per month. I've got $1,000 on my credit card bill, and now I'm paying, $200 a year in, interest. It's like that's maybe a lot of money for certain folks. It's like, just imagine having $38 trillion in debt. Like, it's astounding amounts of interest. And so these countries have to debase their currency. So they have to print more money, i.e. inflation, in order to pay for their year-to-year needs, but then also a big part of that, a growing part of that, is paying off the interest. And so it's kind of like this downward spiral in terms of just accumulating more and more debt over time because the interest on the debt is so high. And then the countries, of course, when do you ever hear about like, oh yeah, we balanced the budget this year, we're actually like in a surplus? Like, it never happens. It's like, oh, we're happy that we're only, $1 billion in debt, not, 10 billion like last year. So essentially, my understanding from folks that know a lot more about this than me, that I listen to regularly, they basically have said things to the effect of governments are just addicted to spending money, and they just can't get themselves out of debt. And so you wind up with this inflation. And so, the value of a dollar now is markedly less than the value of that dollar, say, like 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. I know when I was a kid, a loaf of bread was like, I don't know, $1.50 or something like that. Now I don't buy bread because I've been gluten-free for many years, but I think it's like, I don't know, $4, $5, something like that. Like, it's a lot more expensive, not because the bread is innately more valuable, but the dollars we're using to pay for it are worth less. Um, there's a financial expert. He's like one of the biggest names in finance. His name's Ray Dalio. Just Ray, like Ray, and then Dalio, Dalio. So he's been a big name in finance for many years. He's written several books. I can't remember his exact bio, but he ran. I think he recently retired, but he ran like an incredibly successful financial company, hedge fund, something. I can't remember. Again, not my area of expertise in terms of all the exact lingo, but he's a very big name. And he, a few years ago, I came across some videos that he had posted on YouTube. I was reading a book about finance. For context, I'm incredibly interested in money. Like, I'm just fascinated by it. I'm incredibly interested in finance, just as kind of like a side project. And yet, in my personal life, like, I lead quite a humble existence. I drive like the most gas efficient, economy car that I can buy. Like, my older son makes fun of me all the time. He's like, you drive a Honda Fit? Like, it's like, that's not like, it's not a very prestigious car. It's like, I don't care. Like, I have no interest in that. Like, I have a incredibly like, I don't spend money on clothing. I do martial arts as, hobby. So I spend money on my gym membership, but like, that's about it. Like, we spend money on like high quality food, like, free range organic, meats and organic food and things like that. But like, my wife and I, like, we're very humble people. So as much as I'm very, we're very low maintenance cost wise people. Now we have 3 children, which kids are expensive. So we spend money on our kids, but I'm fascinated by money, and yet, like, I'm not a money, I'm not a luxurious person. So it's an interesting dichotomy, I guess. I think it's interesting anyway. So I'm not really sure why my brain's wired that way, but I'm very fascinated by this, but don't spend a lot of money and not like money focused. So I don't like to just kind of throw that out there, that you're not thinking that like, oh my gosh, this guy's obsessed with money, even though I'm very, very interested in it. So anyways, the long and short of it is that I have, dabbled and read various books like on finance and this and that and, wealth accumulation and different things like that over the course of time. And so Ray Dalio, he's a big name in the finance world. So he, as I was saying, he uh, posted a few videos, these like kind of nice little animated videos. I'm sure he probably didn't do the animation himself, but anyways, he did the voiceover for these animations. And he has a few different videos, but one of them is about how currency debasement works. He basically talks about the money printing. He talks about how this has been done from over the course of human history. So there have been basically, the great powers over the course of time. And I believe it was, the Dutch once upon a time, and then England, kind of became the, sort of the financial center of the world, like the most, like the wealthiest, I should say, like economy in the world. And then that, of course, eventually became the US. And then basically just talking about how this pattern just keeps repeating, just due to various reasons, and unfortunately due to things like colonization and, different war related things and whatnot, certain nation states become the financial sort of superpower in the world. And then, so obviously the US dollar is kind of like the global currency. And so, but over time, all of these former states like the Dutch and then the UK, like the UK and then England, but eventually like they sort of like overinflate to the point where then they overspend and then eventually somebody else takes over. And so he kind of talks about how like where are things at in that cycle for the US, and, looking at the numbers on their balance sheet, it's like it doesn't look good. And so anyways, he has a really, I'll include the link to that video in the description, like in the show notes of the video. So if you want to cross-reference that, it's about a 15-minute long video or something like that. And it's a video where I feel like it really should be shown to like every high school student. I think every person should see that at some point and just see like, oh, okay, like this is how currency debasement works, and just kind of being aware of that, and how, talks about inflation and the different systems that are in place to try to combat inflation, but how ultimately it's just every human history keeps repeating itself, and it just keeps on going up. So that's kind of the backdrop of like, what do I mean by currency debasement? And that's kind of the playing field where, again, it's kind of like a heavy, kind of depressing topic, kind of the opposite of optimism. But again, there is a path forward, I think, which is what I'm getting to. One analogy that's used all the time for currency debasement, last thing I'll say here before we talk about path forward stuff, is they talk about it like a melting ice cube. So I just find that's a really good metaphor just to think about, like, oh, okay, so let's say someone says like, you know what, I'm 65 years old. I've managed to accumulate like $2 million. I've got $2 million in my bank account, and I'm gonna retire on that. Like I'm just gonna live on that. And if that $2 million is sitting in their bank account. Okay, actually, let's go back here. Let's say someone retires early. They're like 30 years old, and they're like, I've got, $5 million in the bank. And it's like, that's tons of money. This is going to last me until I'm, I somehow know I'm going to live to be 85. This is going to last me for the next, 55 years. I'm going to spend, whatever 5 million divided by 55 is, and that's gonna last me. That's not, if they're planning to say take out their whatever it is, like $100,000 or something like that every year to live on. That's $100,000 today is not going to be $100,000 in 50 years. It's a melting ice cube. The value of that dollar is going to go down. So again, it's a little bit of a depressing thing to think about. But when money is sitting in our bank accounts, to my understanding, if it's just sitting there, it's just losing value over time, just sitting there. And so that's why, so to my understanding, that's why at this point in time, a lot of folks are, again, this is all just to my understanding of things. By all means, do your own research, fact check these things. But there's a lot of folks out there who are noticing, or being told, who are noticing that there is this, runaway spending, this runaway inflation, and currency is being debased. And so they are looking at investing in assets that are going to retain their value over time. So for example, this year alone, gold, that shiny yellow stuff that, there used to be the gold standard, it used to be, I think until the 1970s, that for every dollar of US currency, which again is like, the global currency, if you will, for every US dollar that was printed, there was an equivalent amount of gold in the US treasury to back that up. So like it was the gold standard, it's just where that term comes from. But then I believe it was in the 70s, can't remember who the president was at the time, but they took the dollar off the gold standard because they needed to keep printing money because they were overspending and in excessive debt. And so then, the dollar was then decoupled from gold. And so then that's kind of your first sign that like, okay, this is the beginning of the end. It could take years. That was 50 years ago, over 50 years ago. But it's like, okay, that's kind of a sign that like this inflationary system is kind of taking off, not in a good way. So what's happened in the last year, gold has gone up about 60% in value, which is a huge spike, because a lot of folks, and not just individuals, but also like countries like China in particular, have been buying lots and lots of gold because they see the writing on the wall that the U.S. dollar is devaluing over time. So buying something like gold, where it's like, well, there's a finite supply of gold. There's only so much. I've heard a stat, and this doesn't make sense to my brain, but I've heard enough smart people say it that I assume it's true. And I did ask ChatGPT for what it's worth, and ChatGPT said it was true. But my understanding is that there's in existence right now, there's as much gold as would fit into an Olympic-sized swimming pool, which seems crazy to me because so many people have gold, wedding rings and jewelry and this, that, and the other thing, and gold, I don't know, statues in some places and whatnot. But evidently, that's how much gold has been mined up to this point, give or take. So it's a finite resource. So meaning that you can't print more gold. Yes, you can dig up more, but that's not the easiest thing to do either. And so gold, they kind of refer to as a hard asset. It's something that you can't just generate more of it out of thin air. And so if you invest in gold now, then even if the currency is debased, then the gold is going to kind of retain a certain relative value over the course of time. So if say, I don't know, 50 years ago, somebody spent, say, $100 in gold at that point in time, if there was no increased valuation of gold over time, and then inflation has now turned that $100 back then is maybe $1,000 now, that same amount of gold is now worth $1,000. So it's kind of retained its value. Whereas if I just kept that $100 cash in my bank account, it would only be worth the equivalent of, say, $10 now if the inflation has gone up, say, tenfold. So they refer to these hard assets as kind of these safe investments, if you will, if inflation is an issue, which evidently it is, and getting worse over time. So just as evidence of what I'm saying here is that gold has been going up in value, like just like parabolically in the last year. So it's really, really shot up. Another example is Bitcoin. So cryptocurrency is something that years ago I had just kind of tucked away as like that just seems like kind of a crazy thing. It's just like these made up numbers on a computer screen, and like that's just why would I ever put money into that? 'Cause it's just this made up thing. But then when you really look behind the curtain and see like, oh well, when the government can just print money when they need more money, it's like, well, it's also just numbers on a computer screen. When the dollar was decoupled from gold, when the gold standard no longer existed, it's like, well, that's basically the same thing. Like money's not really real from that perspective. It's obviously we all use it, but like if you can just print more, then it's like, what's the actual value of money? Similarly, well, if you can just create more Bitcoin, what's really the value of Bitcoin? Well, it's the value that people assign to it. So without going off on like turning this into a crypto podcast episode, what's very interesting with Bitcoin is that the value of Bitcoin right now in US dollars, it's been oscillating between about $110,000 and $125,000 per Bitcoin. The price per Bitcoin, I mean, when it was first created, I think 15-ish years ago, it was like nothing. Like it was worth nothing. It was worth $0. But at certain points, once it started to get adopted, like it was worth $100 per Bitcoin, eventually 1,000, eventually 10,000. So if you held, say you had bought Bitcoin when it was $100 per Bitcoin, and so you bought like, I don't know, 10 Bitcoin. So you spent $1,000 on Bitcoin. That Bitcoin now has increased in value by 1,000-fold. So you would be a millionaire had you bought Bitcoin when it was $100 per Bitcoin. So it has significantly increased in value. Now, why do I bring up Bitcoin when in relation to the gold conversation? Well, there's a finite number of Bitcoin as well. When Bitcoin was created, and this is a whole other rabbit hole that one can go down if one is so inclined, but the person who developed Bitcoin, somebody named Satoshi, he kind of designed this as, my understanding, kind of like an alternative financial, like with the idea that it could be an alternative financial system that could be used. And so it was set up in such a way that only a certain amount of Bitcoin would be released every year and or able to be mined, as they say, Bitcoin mining every year, and that there'd only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in existence. So it's a finite resource, just like gold. Just like you can't just go out and say, "Oh, we're just going to print more gold." It's like you can't just go out and print more Bitcoin, even though it's kind of like this made up thing on a computer screen. It's more a little more. It's a tad more eloquent than that, but there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. 20 million have already been mined. There's only another 1 million left that will ever be mined, and those are not going to those are going to be released over the next 120 years. So it's a finite resource, and most of it has been mined. And then my understanding is that about 5,000 Bitcoin are just lost forever. They were lost on hard drives or just they're just gone because people would store them on like USB drives, these like cold wallets, as they say. And so it's estimated about 5,000 of them are just gone. So it's really a finite resource of about 15 million Bitcoin, give or take maybe 16 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. So again, as much as it sounds kind of funny, because with gold, it's like, oh, I have my gold, my gold nugget or my gold bar or my gold coin or whatever. It's like a tangible resource you can hold. It's a finite resource. It's a hard asset. Bitcoin, it's not a tangible thing you can hold. You can just see it on a computer screen, but it's also a hard asset in the sense, well, it's also considered a digital hard asset in that only so many of them will exist over time. And so the other reason I bring up Bitcoin is because just as people in certain nations have been hoarding gold over the last bit as sort of a hedge, if you will, or protection against this currency debasement, there's been a huge pivot towards Bitcoin, and this is part of why I really started doing more research and looking more into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Because again, I had just poo-pooed it once upon a time. Had I not, I'd be a very, very, very wealthy man now, I suppose. But whatever, it's all good. Again, I'm not really focused on the money, just again interested in it. And so what's very interesting to me is that because even hearing all this, I was like, I'm still kind of skeptical about the Bitcoin. It still seems kind of weird. It's not this like hard tangible asset, like a digital asset, like sounds, kind of weird and made up. But there is a huge momentum by some of the biggest investment firms in the world who are investing in Bitcoin. So like there are companies like BlackRock. There are folks like, Ray Dalio and other like big names in finance. Paul Tudor Jones being another one. I'm blanking on some of the other ones off the top of my head now, but like some of the biggest names in finance, some of whom years ago were like, yeah, Bitcoin, that's just like a farce. It's just a, Ponzi scheme, whatever. They're now saying like, everyone should probably be not, some of them are saying like, everyone should have like 2 to 5% of their investment for portfolio in Bitcoin. Some of them are going further than that, saying like it should be, a 10% in some cases. Companies like BlackRock are offering these things called Bitcoin ETFs, where like they're just like massive amounts. Like I think that BlackRock, again, there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin in existence, and again, probably only about 15 million in existence right now because of all the ones that have been lost over time. I believe they're close to about a million, like I think it's around 800,000 Bitcoin that they've accumulated that they've sold to their clients. So like these massive financial institutions are offering these products to their clients, and people are buying them up like crazy. There are some countries, like right now, France, my understanding is they have a bill to look into trying to buy up like 2% of all the Bitcoin in existence, which who knows if that bill will pass. But like the fact that these like countries are talking about this is pretty interesting. There are some countries like Portugal, to my understanding, where they have certain offerings right now where if you hold a certain amount of Bitcoin, you can use that as leverage to get EU citizenship. So it's not just like kind of these crazy guys with tinfoil caps in their mom's basement, talking about Bitcoin. It's not just the crypto bros. Like this is becoming really mainstream. The U.S. government has recently passed some legislation, and there's more legislation coming down the road where they're like basically just green lighting crypto. They now have like a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the States. There's talk about like enhancing that, and there's also been some interesting talk where there is some interesting talk about the U.S. possibly using Bitcoin to get out of their massive deficit, basically. So looking at if they can accumulate enough Bitcoin and then the value of that goes up enough over time, if they become like a primary Bitcoin holder, and then kind of looking at like, okay, instead of the US dollar being kind of the main global standard, if say digital currency, i.e., largely Bitcoin, becomes the most valuable commodity, this actual valuable hard asset, kind of what used to be the gold standard now is the Bitcoin standard. If they become the global leader in holding that, then their valuation is going to go up like crazy, and they could actually use that to pay off their trillions in debt. So I just bring all this up because, again, like I came into this topic with a lot of skepticism once upon a time. A lot of interest in finance and things like that. Interest in the debasement kind of steered away from it because it was sort of depressing and kind of like, oh man, just kind of sucks that the value of our asset or of our dollars are going down. But then learning more about like, okay, when there's investment in hard assets and things like that, like, whether it's actual hard assets like gold, or it's digital hard assets like Bitcoin, and there's other cryptocurrencies too, like Ethereum and Solana, and there's some other ones out there. It's like, okay, there's actually maybe, well, there is a path forward. Now, of course, there's no guarantees in life. Who knows what might come up? Gold might crash. Some country, I don't know, they might make Bitcoin illegal, but like that seems very unlikely because there seems to be this mass adoption, especially in the U.S. And some other places where they're making the access to it like freer and freer over time. The biggest financial industries in the world are investing in this, making it an option for their clients, advocating it all the time. Like Larry Fink, who's I think the CEO or the top, the top guy at BlackRock, which they're massive group that owns, a lot of the world. He's talking about it on, CNN and CNBC and all these places all the time about like, talking about how valuable it is to invest in. It seems like there's a lot of momentum moving in that direction. So when all of those folks are talking about it, when, the U.S. is greenlighting it, all this, it's like, this makes it very much seem like it's not just the tinfoil hat guys hanging out in the basement, the crypto bro thing. It really has become very, very mainstream. So I've been very fascinated by this, and I think it's just something to be aware of because at the end of the day, if we have that melting ice cube sitting in our bank accounts, if we're if we have investments, like, okay, yeah, I don't just have my money sitting in a bank account. I've got it in my RRSP. I'm investing it in this and that, kind of looking at, where are those investments actually going? Are they going into, and what are the returns looking like? If, it's like, oh, I have an investment, I'm getting, 6% back per year on my investments that I have in my RRSP, or that's a Canadian thing, but registered retirement saving plan, or I guess in the States it'd be like maybe your 401k. I don't really know the exact difference there, but I think it's a retirement savings plan thing, my Roth IRA, whatever, all these terms that I hear when I'm listening to the U.S. folks, because most of the folks are based out of the U.S. It's like, well, if the return is like, 6% per year, 8% per year, something like that, it's like, that's all well and good, but that's not, to my understanding, that's not going to keep up with inflation. That's not going to keep up with the currency debasement. Whereas if it's like, my understanding, Bitcoin over the last, several years, like it has a CAGR, compound annual growth rate of like around, I believe it's like 16%. So it's like, oh, that's pretty good. And depending if you happen to buy the dips and ride the highs, Bitcoin earlier this year, I believe was like there was a dip after the tariff announcements back in the spring. It dipped down to 80,000. So if you bought it at 80,000 and then sold when it got to 120,000, it's like, wow, that's a 50% increase, which is just insane, right? Like compared to a 6% annual growth rate, a 50% is just insane. Like this is what, the investment brokers out there, like they just salivate about like a 50% growth. Like that's unheard of. And yet it can happen. Or like the 60% rise in gold this year alone. It's like, oh my gosh, like this is just like crazy. Like this is a huge boon. The one other interview that I'm going to mention in the show notes here is with another investment guru. His name is Raoul Pal. I really like Raoul Pal. He's a very interesting guy, very colorful guy. He's kind of like Simon Cowell in a way, in that he's just, any interview I've ever seen him in, no matter who's interviewing him, he's just always wearing a t-shirt and looks very, very comfortable. He's got a really, I really enjoy him. So I'm going to post a link to an interview that he had, and he talks about a lot of different things, but talks about sort of the role in crypto around currency debasement and things like this. So the Ray Dalio video is more about like just kind of the backdrop in terms of like how currency debasement has been this theme over human history, or like, recent human history, or in the last, I don't know, 150, 200 years kind of thing, seeing how that's kind of gone from, again, the Dutch to the English to the UK to the States now. So that's a little bit more of like a history lesson. I think just good to see that backdrop. But then with Raoul Pal, he in this interview talks about more, puts what I'm saying here in this interview a little more succinctly, and you can hear it from someone who actually really knows what he's talking about, because he's a financial expert, not just someone who's giving you third-hand information in my summary. But hopefully my third-hand, layperson summary is hopefully helpful in some way. Um, with the interview with Raoul Paul, he also talks about just kind of like how young people can position themselves for the future based on the changing economy, changing how the world's likely going to be heavily changed, already being changed, but will be changed ever more by or to a greater extent over time with the changes with AI and things like that. So I just as a father of three, one oldest who's 19, and then kids who are 8 and 9 years old. Just thinking about like what are their futures going to look like? The whole idea of like, oh yeah, you're gonna go to post-secondary school, you're gonna become a lawyer, you're gonna become an engineer, you're gonna become a doctor, you're gonna become this and that. It's like, I don't know. The playing field seems to be different. If I had a child right now who said like, I want to be a graphic designer, I'd be like, I'm not sure how that's going to go because it looks like AI is disrupting that field significantly. Even there's talk about like even lawyers. It's like, oh, that's like if you're a lawyer, you're set. It's like maybe people will make jokes about you because there's so many lawyer jokes out there. But it's like you're going to be fine. You're going to do really well. And like there's talk about like maybe that field's going to be disrupted too. Maybe if you're like the top 1% in the lawyering field, that's going to be fine. But anyways, sorry, getting off on tangent here. But he does talk about that, which I think is very interesting too, especially for parents to be listening to, or young people to be listening to. Raoul Paul does use some fairly colorful language. Again, he's just seems to be a very comfortable with himself, which is good. So, anyways, if your ears are sensitive to colorful language, maybe don't listen to that interview. Maybe listen to somebody else. But Raoul Paul, that interview I think is very useful. Kind of summarizes a lot of or talks in more detail about a lot of what I'm saying here. And then one other resource I'll just mention, I'll post in the comment section is my one of my favorite. I would say my favorite. There's a few folks that I follow that talk about the currency debasement, the cryptocurrency, different kind of savvy investment options to kind of try to circumvent the currency debasement debacle. So anyways, his name is James. I don't know what his last name is actually, but he has a YouTube channel. It's called Investment Answers or IA. And he's awesome. The first time I listened to him, I was like, I have no idea what the heck this guy is talking about. It's like he was speaking a different language, all the acronyms. He talks really fast. He's he's information bombing like left, right, and center with his episodes. But but after probably about 2 months of listening to him regularly and looking up all the different terms and the acronyms and things like that, he is like hands down the most I think thoughtful, down to earth, just wonderful person to listen to when it comes to all things related to this. So if you're interested in that and kind of want like a guide to guide you along the way, he gives out all of his information for free. He's like basically has said in the past that he's made tons of money. He just kind of continues to make money for fun because he's just really good at it. And so he keeps on investing, but doesn't like have you don't have to like subscribe to his, whatever online program or something like that. He just basically gives all the information away on his YouTube channel or on the Substacks that he writes. So it really just really great, open-hearted guy, and I really, really enjoy listening to him. So I highly, highly recommend his information as well. So I'll leave it there for now. If there's follow-up questions or interest in me talking about these topics in further detail in a future episode, I'm more than happy to do that. I just kind of wanted to get this out on your radars because, again, if you don't know about these things, then you can't decide if you don't know about the topic, then you can't decide whether you want to learn more about it or do something about it. If you listen to this and you're like, you know what, I'm not that interested, then well, congratulations on making it to this part of the episode. Like, man, oh man, you really, when you set your mind to do something, you really do it. But assume that if you've listened this far, you're interested in this topic. So I wanted to get this on folks' radars. And yeah, thanks for your attention. Next episode will be about something different, probably circling back more to the, what are some of the more like kind of bigger picture things related to like how we can kind of craft an optimistic future moving forward, and maybe some of the more tangible steps that we can look at to do that. And yeah, I'll leave it there for now. So thanks for your attention today.